Chapter 35. Evacuation. As well furnished as Greystock's cave was, there weren't all that many places to sit. There was a small desk in the corner, on top of which sat a large pile of papers. In front of this desk was a fairly decent looking wooden chair, complete with a cushioned seat. It was the only chair in the cave. Reyes sat down and made himself as comfortable as he could. He pushed the chair onto its two back legs and placed his feet gently on the desk without giving a second thought to the papers that he knocked off the table by doing so. He then tucked his hands behind his head, closed his eyes, and rocked slowly back and forth on the chair, listening to the gentle snoring sounds that were coming from Greystock. It could be quite a while before Tamitha would make an appearance. It all depended on where in the caverns she had gotten to, and whether or not the two militiamen knew where to go and find her. While he waited, Reyes couldn't help but think about certain things. Gagara was at the shore of the lake. She was alone except for a small group of humans and a couple of horses. Hopefully Quinnigoth and Tanegi were keeping an eye on her from nearby, but Reyes hoped that they were doing so from somewhere out of sight. He worried about Gagara. She didn't take well to the human form, and she hated wearing human clothing. She was proud of being a harpy, and Reyes worried that she might do something silly to expose her true self, especially if one of the humans up there made some fatuous remark. Reyes was still thinking about Gagara when the door of the cave opened and Tamitha swept across the threshold with her nanny, Movealita, in tow. Reyes rocked the chair back onto all four of its legs in an instant, and then climbed to his feet, as if he was preparing for an inspection. Tamitha glanced briefly at Reyes and then walked over to the sleeping form of Greystock. Her eyes flickered briefly from Greystock to the supine figure of the old mage. "What did you do?" "He's asleep," Reyes said simply. "Nothing worse." Tamitha glanced suspiciously at Reyes. "He wouldn't just fall asleep like this. What happened? Did you poison his wine or something?" "Wine?" Reyes replied. He didn't see any sign of wine in the room, nor had Greystock made the gesture of offering him any kind of drink. "No, I used a little magic." "Harpies can't use magic," Tamitha said, sounding a little indignant. "We can't be male either," Reyes countered. Reyes half expected Tamitha to at least smile at his comment, but she didn't. If anything, she seemed more than a little angry at what she could see. "Is this the way you do things? You don't get your own way with someone, so you put them to sleep and ask someone else until you get the answer you want?" "It's probably the harpy way of doing things," Movealita commented. Reyes started to feel quite guilty. Tamitha was right. He hadn't been getting through to Greystock, and so had put the man to sleep. He had then fetched Tamitha here, thinking she would be more pliant to his words. Then he shook the feeling of guilt from himself. He kept his words calm and measured as he replied, "You know how important my mission is here. The king himself sent me. I'm supposed to enlist the aid of your little community for the coming battle." "And Greystock?" Tamitha started. "Greystock wanted to be paid for the honour of serving the king," Reyes explained, trying not to sound too angry. "He wanted me to hand over my ring to him. He didn't seem to care that most of your people are slowly starving to death. It sounded to me as if he was only interested in what he was getting out of the war." "Uncle Greystock?" Tamitha said. "I don't believe it." "Well, I noticed he seems to be comfortable enough," Reyes said, indicating the room. "I don't see him going short." Reyes pointed to the door to the next part of Greystock's chambers. 3 rooms? Are they all this well furnished? Where's this wine you mentioned? I'll bet the rank and file and those who are starving don't get to drink wine." "Leaders have always fared better than the average citizen," Movealita commented. "I guess you're right," Reyes replied, speaking sharply, although he tried to keep his words calm. "I don't begrudge him a little luxury, but to have all this when the rest of the people have virtually nothing, and then to refuse when I offer him a way to feed those people. I'm sorry, but I lost my temper with him. I might have killed him." "Wouldn't surprise me if you had," Movealita commented. Reyes sighed. "You know what's at stake? Tamitha, I need you to get your people together and bring them to the map room." Tamitha glanced again at the sleeping form of Greystock. "I should wait to confirm this with Uncle Greystock. You can't just come down here and take command, as if our own wishes don't matter." "Tamitha, please," Reyes replied. "This is important. Once Greystock is in the painting, once he has met the king and queen for himself, I'm sure he'll be more—" "Pliable," Movealita suggested. "Willing to do what is required," Reyes finished. Tamitha nodded. "Why the map room?" "It's near, it's easy to find, and it's large enough for me to lay out the painting," Reyes told her. Tamitha smiled. "I've seen that painting, and I think you imagine it to be larger than it is. This small cave is probably large enough for it." The map room is a more suitable location, though, Movioletta suggested. She pointed to the main entrance to the cavern and said, "That door will prove to be quite a bottleneck since it blocks the corridor when it's open." "I'll get on it," Tamitha said. She headed towards the door. "You may want to enlist the help of some of the soldiers," Reyes suggested. "Get word around the refuge as quickly as you can. Take the 2 men on guard outside this door. They don't seem to be doing much there anyway." Tamitha giggled. "Yeah, I never understood why they were there. Appearances, I guess." She opened the door and left the cave, and Movioletta followed close behind. They closed the door behind them, giving them access to the rest of the passage. With the guards gone, Reyes was sure that the path was clear for him to make his way to the map room unchallenged. Once there, he could bring out the painting and prepare it for the population of these caverns. Once everything was set up, it shouldn't be too difficult for him to carry the sleeping figures of Greystock and Colston along the empty passage to the map room, and thence into the painting. For a moment, Reyes wondered about the 2 guards on duty in the map room. He hoped that Tamitha would have the presence of mind to take them with her as well, but what if she hadn't? What if they were still there? He might find it awkward trying to explain why he was walking around the corridors of this underground network, with the leader of the Lufton Resistance casually thrown over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. What would it hurt to see if the painting really would fit in this small cave? The worst thing that could possibly happen was that the makeshift frame that held the painting would be shattered. The painting itself ought to be fine. It was canvas and could bend quite easily without being damaged. If nothing else, Reyes felt that bringing the painting out in this room could save him a lot of awkward questions as to what had happened to Greystock and Colson, especially if the 2 guards were still on duty in the map room, or if the people living in these caverns started to gather in the map room before he had finished transporting the 2 sleepers. Reyes sighed loudly. He closed his eyes and held his breath. Then he summoned forth the painting from the hammerstone. Tamitha was right. The painting rested easily in the space between the far wall and the main door. There were even a couple of inches to spare. Reyes worried about the door for a moment. What if someone should come in? Then he remembered that the door opened outwards and the painting would be safe. Reyes let the painting settle back against the wall behind it. The weight of the frame caused it to slide down the wall a little until the bottom part of the painting found a small divot in the cave floor that served to hold it in place. "That will do," Reyes muttered to himself. He took a step back and admired his handiwork. He brushed his hands together and then looked around for the sleeping figures of Greystock and Colson. Without any ado, Reyes placed the hands of the 2 men together and then grabbed hold of Greystock's leg with one hand while he laid the other flat against the surface of the painting. A final quick glance at the door of the cave, and then Reyes uttered the key phrase that would take them into the painting. The great hall of the old ruined castle was much as Reyes remembered it. Even the dust was exactly as he remembered it from his last visit. Reyes had laid Greystock and Colson side by side. He placed them so that they were no longer touching. Then he made his way quickly to the entrance of the ruin. As he had expected, there were still 2 guards on duty there. Reyes stepped through the doorway and spoke to them plainly. "There are 2 men sleeping in the great hall. I'm going to be bringing a fair number of people into the painting shortly, and I think it would be better if they didn't see those 2. It might also be a good idea if the man called Greystock had a chat with the king about a few things, such as loyalty." "You want us to move them?" one of the guards asked. "Yes," Reyes said, "move them. Get them out of sight, and hurry." Reyes was beginning to feel a little pushed for time as he hurried back into the great hall. He noticed briefly that the 2 guards had followed him. They immediately set about the task of moving the 2 sleeping men. Reyes didn't stay to watch them. He extended his hand and uttered the key phrase that would return him to the real world. Reyes was back in the cavern again, the palm of his hand resting lightly against the surface of the painting. It took him only a second to get his bearings. Then, without even having to move his hand, he placed the painting back in the ring. Then he made his way out of the cavern and into the adjoining passage. The passage was empty. Evidently Tamitha had taken the 2 guards with her as she had promised. Reyes could still hear his heart thumping in his chest as he walked the short distance to the map room. There were no guards in the map room either. Tamitha had done a good job clearing the way for him. He wondered how she had been able to convince them to leave their posts and follow her. After his experience at having managed to fit the painting in that small room after all, Reyes was pretty certain that there was plenty of room around the table for him to summon the painting without having to move the table out of the way first. Reyes walked over to one of the walls of the map room. The wall was rough, but that wasn't important. What was important was that there was enough room for the painting between the 2 nearest passages. The painting fitted nicely against it, and it started to slide down the wall under its own weight, but then it settled at only a slight angle. Reyes touched it with his hand, checking that it was stable. When it didn't slide any further, He decided it was balancing securely. All that was left for Reyes was to wait for the people to arrive. Slowly, over the next 2 hours, Reyes ferried people into the painting. The hardest part was that with each new group of arrivals, he had to reassure them that the painting was safe. In almost every group, there would be a few who would insist on hanging back and waiting to see others not just enter the painting, but also leave again unscathed. Tamitha was a great help in many of these cases, jumping in and out of the painting as if it was a paddling pool. It was left to Reyes, though, to do most of the actual ferrying. "The king should be proud of you," Tamitha said. It was just her, Violetta, and a small handful of soldiers left to enter the painting. "You've greatly increased his military might." "We have," Reyes replied tiredly. "It'd been a long day." Mangloss had suggested spending the night in First Town and pushing on to Arlis in the morning. Reyes was looking forward to reaching First Town as quickly as he could. Frankly, he wouldn't say no to a quick nap down here, if it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to get back up top and see Kagara again. "Is this everyone?" "That's everyone," Tamitha said, "except for Uncle Braystock and his pet magician. Unless they're already in," Reyes told her. "You're sure there's no one left behind? No stragglers that might be in the little used sections of the caverns? Nobody busy in the latrine caverns?" "Well, there might be the prisoners," Tamitha said, "though I doubt it. The prison guards would most likely have killed them before they answered the call." "Maybe I should check," Reyes said. "And do what?" Violetta asked. "Enlist them into the king's army? He might be willing to trust your kind, but I can't see him accepting an elf or two, especially not when it's elves you plan to fight." "His kind?" one of the remaining soldiers repeated. "Best to leave them, Reyes," Tamitha said. "They were earmarked for death the moment they were captured. If the guards didn't finish them, let them starve to death." "That's a callous attitude for a little girl," Reyes started. "You forget," Tamitha replied. "I am the Duchess of Borton." "This is war," Violetta added. "What kind is he?" the soldier pressed. "Yes, Duchess," Reyes accepted. He ignored the guard. "You'd better take your people into the painting. Then I'll take everyone to Arlis." "I'd still like to know how he plans to do that without the elves catching him," the soldier who had spoken voiced. Reyes looked briefly at the soldier. He thought for a moment how weak discipline had gotten down here, and then considering that he was just one soldier doing all the talking, maybe he had been a relatively fresh recruit when the elves had attacked. The man certainly looked young enough. "I have my ways. He'll fly over them," Violetta commented. "Didn't you know? Reyes here is a harpy." Reyes looked round sharply at Violetta. What did she say that for? Was he going to have to explain his entire history to these soldiers? How long was it going to take to win their trust? "He's the soldier commented, and then he started to laugh. "Oh, nice one. You almost had me going for a second there." Reyes closed his eyes, the feeling of relief flooding through his body, though he hoped he hadn't shown it too much. "I guess we'd better get going," Tamitha said. She walked up to the painting and placed the palm of her young hand against its surface. "Everyone, hold hands." A moment or two later, Reyes was alone in the map room. He walked up to the painting and placed it back into the ring.